Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And to the front pages, lots of really interesting stories today, in fact. The Sunday Times has led with the cyber attack story and a picture of Jeremy Corbyn at Glastonbury. But they've also got an interesting story there alleging that Tory MPs are lining up behind the Chancellor, Phil Hammond, as a possible caretaker MP to take over from Theresa May, but then apparently to step down again so somebody else can take over again. It's becoming ridiculous, really, but there we go. So that's the Sunday Times. The Sunday Telegraph again has got that cyber attack story there, and they suggest the Conservatives want to skip a, quote, toxic generation and install a younger face as their next leader. Good luck with that. It worked for the Labour Party. Oh, no, it didn't. It worked the other way, didn't it, of course. And there's Jeremy Corbyn again at Glastonbury on the front page of The Observer. A really interesting story there, splash here. They say that the fire safety rules in Britain's schools, or England's schools, which were going to be relaxed, are now not going to be relaxed, and a major U-turn is going on inside government about the whole health and safety culture after that terrible Grenfell Tower. Another interesting story there about the unions wanting a soft Brexit. We'll talk about that shortly. There's the Sunday Telegraph again. Finally, the Mail on Sunday's got a very interesting interview there with Prince Harry, where he talks out very openly about his wilder years and being a reluctant prince. Well worth the read. So lots to talk about. But let's start with the politics. Fraser Nelson. You've got the front page of the Sunday Times there, and they're on manoeuvres again.
When are Conservatives ever not on manoeuvres? But this particular manoeuvre is interesting. I mean, it's common agreement that Theresa May is doomed. It's a question of when rather than whether she will go. But what happens in the meantime? Does she stay on? Now, here is a theory that Phil Hammond would stay on, promising to resign and promising another leadership contest in another couple of years, just what the party needs. And nothing is so crazy it couldn't actually happen in the Conservative Party right now.
Well, do you think, really? I mean, they've started the Brexit negotiations. If they suddenly said, oh, by the way, we don't know who's the Prime Minister, we'll have to pause things for a start. I mean, we'd just be laughed out of court. It would be impossible, wouldn't it?
We're being laughed at right now. The question is, would we be laughed at less if we had somebody who had a bit more of a grip on government? Because Theresa May is being ignored now by her cabinet. Andrea Leadsam's popping up on TV without even telling Number 10. Would somebody else have a better grip as an interim point? This is the question. I don't think it's a very plausible answer.
And you've got Boris Johnson.
Well, the Mail on Sunday is saying that the real contest now is really between Boris and David Davis, which is certainly true. If a leadership contest would be held tomorrow, it would be one of these two in contention. And the question is, what's the biggest problem facing the Tory party? Is it staving off Jeremy Corbyn, in which case you need a populist like Boris to fight a populist? Or is it getting Brexit right, in which case you need a bruiser like David Davis to steer
who understands the details? Well, we'll find out, we hope. Ellie May, looking from the left at all of this, does it really matter to the Labour Party what the Conservatives now do in terms of their leader?
Obviously, some leaders I think will be easier to beat than others. I'm not actually sure. I find this belief in the media that Boris Johnson is this sort of really popular figure kind of odd. I think he's actually very divisive. I'm not sure that a lot of people like him. I think David Davis might fare better, but that would definitely lose the sort of Cameronite Tory vote if they were to go with someone who was so tied into Brexit. I can't really imagine.
So there are problems on either side.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Tory party at the moment is basically in a lot of trouble because their leader is completely toxified and she has no authority within the party. But there isn't an obvious successor, so they're in a lot of trouble. And I also think it was a huge mistake to trigger Article 50 and then call a general election, because obviously that means that now we have to go into Brexit negotiations, whether we like it or not, and that really complicates the issue.
I have to say, I think of Theresa May watching programmes like this and being told that she's toxic, that she's finished and all the rest of it, and I think I feel slightly sorry for her. She was thinking, hold on a second, I'm still here, I'm still in Prime Minister, this still looks like Number 10, doesn't it? Yes, it does. And she has a plan, Henry Brofeld, which the Sun has reheated an old joke made by Margaret Thatcher, unwittingly, we're told.
We've got so little to laugh at the moment, haven't we? It's rather nice. May, I need a Willie. Of course, I thought she had one anyway, but it goes back, doesn't it, to Willie Whitelaw, this.
That's
and
right.
Margaret
Margaret Thatcher allegedly said this and couldn't work out why everybody was laughing.
Well, I know. That wonderful, wasn't it, that? I mean, humour, you would have thought actually someone like Margaret Thatcher would have had the nous to see that, wouldn't you?
But the essence of this story is that William Hague, that William, is going to be brought back to help bolster number 10.
And to try and prevent cock-ups, which have been happening helter-skelter. And do you think, is he the sort of chap to do that, do you think?
He is now what passes for an elder statesman. I think he's younger than I am, but he's now an elder statesman. He's been bald for a very long time, which helps an awful lot. Anyway, let's move on, if we may, to the other side of politics, Ellie May, because there's an interesting story in The Observer, as I mentioned earlier on, about the trade unions, the TUC, saying to the Labour leadership, we want to stay inside the single market, which is not Labour policy at the moment.
Well, I find it curious that The Observer has gone with this headline, because the actual content of the story, it's just a couple of comments from Francis O'Grady, and most of the story is about sort of senior figures in the Labour Party. So the two that are named here are Hilary Benn and Chuka Umunna, wanting to push for a different kind of Brexit where we would stay in the single market, and that they are talking to other Labour MPs about this, and also having sort of sneaky conversations with Remainer Tory MPs. I mean, what Labour is currently calling for is access to the single market rather than membership, which would mean...
Because membership of the single market effectively means we haven't left the EU, because you have to accept EU rules and you can't have control over immigration and all of that.
Exactly.
And Jeremy Corbyn has said again and again, no, we're leaving.
Well, what he said is, I mean, I think what the Labour position is that, you know, Brexit is happening. It doesn't matter whether who likes it or doesn't like it. The decision has been made and we need to go ahead with it. And I think so the purpose of having access to the single market rather than membership is that the conditions of our relationship with the EU would be decided between the EU and Britain, as opposed to just accepting the rules of the single market wholesale. So I think that's the idea behind it.
The Corbynistas are actually quite firm on Brexit, aren't they? I mean,
Corbynistas is now nearly 13 million people, so I think we should retire that.
Sure, well, let's say
term.
the Labour Party leadership then is, you know, in the manifesto, out of the single market. I mean, Chuka Umunna might say he wants to dilute this position, but it seems he's being rebuffed, and the unions, but they're being rebuffed again by Jeremy Corbyn, who thinks it's settled.
It's a very interesting reflection on the election result, that we're all really interested now what the Labour position is on Brexit in the way that we weren't before. And we've had the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, weighing in today.
We have a voice which I think we should hear a lot more from in politics, actually. Justin Welby is since he took over, he hasn't really intervened that much. Now he's come back to suggest that there's a forum in Parliament which is intended to draw the poison from Brexit, basically some kind of Peace and Reconciliation Committee, if you like, that will hear the concerns of the Remainers and try to come up with a consensus. I mean, he makes the point that you know, the country is still evenly split on Brexit. It might be the case that 85% voted for a Brexit party, but when asked should we leave the EU, there is not an overwhelming majority in favour. So he's thinking, can there be a middle way? One might almost argue that he wants a soft Brexit committee in the House of Commons. Soft
Brexit committee and a new Archbishop of Canterbury party marching ahead. Ellie May, you've also been looking at the Adam Bolton column in the Sunday Times, where Adam has been in Brussels and he's been talking about what is possible and what is not possible. And he's slightly more optimistic, perhaps, than we'd expected.
Yeah, I mean, what he is generally saying is that Britain is, its standing in the EU has declined since, basically because of the chaos in the country, and that the sort of volatile political situation in this country is in stark contrast to quite a stable EU at the moment. And he's also talking about the prospect of no deal. And I think one of the reasons why I was interested in this column is because I think that one of the most irresponsible lines that has come out of the Conservatives over the last year has been no deal is better than a bad deal. No deal is not better than a bad deal. No deal is catastrophic, because it means that we have
very, very bad, as Philip Hammond said here.
Well, yes. I mean, it means that we'll have to adopt World Trade Organization rules, which means very high trade tariffs. The BBC reported between 30 and 40%.
Average 4.
OK. Well...
but let me just finish this point. And I think one thing that the Tory party really needs to do is to say, well, if we have no deal, what does the day after negotiations finish? What does that look like? And I don't think that they've explained that to the public. So I think it's really irresponsible to be putting this about without being clear to the public about what the country will look like in the event of no deal.
Henry, let's move a little away from politics for a moment. A very interesting interview, as I said earlier on, with Prince Harry in the Mail on Sunday. He's talked already about nobody in the royal family actually wants to be king or queen. we do it out of duty. He said also that he's had some wild times in the past, and now he's saying that actually he's a prince who thought about stepping away from the entire royal thing altogether.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the Queen's great motto is never complain, never explain. But we've suddenly got the royals, and through Harry, letting his hair down in an unprecedented way. I mean, this sort of thing has never been said before. And we've always accepted that the next one in line is going to succeed and is going to get on with it. And he actually says, well, first of all, no one wants to be king or queen, which, of course, in a way, one can understand. I mean, it must be the most murderously difficult job to do, and how fantastically well the present Queen has done it. But is it rather too much? Do you think he should have gone quite so far?
The problem is that once somebody is known for speaking out,
yes,
and gets a lot of coverage for being frank and open and eloquent, the media always wants more, squeeze that lemon one more time, and eventually you end up saying something you wish you hadn't said.
And of course, Harry, I think, is very willing to be squeezed in that way. And I think we may get quite a lot more from him. I just wonder if he's going to get one or two wagging fingers from behind in Buckingham Palace or wherever.
Quite possible. Now, Fraser, let's turn to your organ, The Spectator. And you've got quite an unusual and striking front page you put out this week called The Dying of the Right. Just talk us through what you're worried about.
Well, we had a whole issue asking why the Conservatives are giving up on conservatism, not just in Britain but abroad as well. I mean, during the election campaign, we hardly heard any positive reason for voting Tory. It was all Brexit this, Brexit that. And even now, the Conservatives are talking about who, should it be Boris, should it be DD, without asking what, why. What are we for as a party? And right now the Tories are split on austerity, they're split on Brexit. Most Tory MPs actually supported Remain right now. So it's not clear that they have a clear idea what they're for. Meanwhile, the Labour Party is gathering purpose and direction. And so we're having a sort of crisis of intellectual confidence in the Conservatives right now. And without it, they will drain momentum and sit and wait for a general election where Jeremy Corbyn will take over. So they need to work out what purpose they serve in our democracy.
And as it were, the drift of events has been against them as well, because one of the outcomes of the Grenfell Tower disaster was a rethinking of health and safety. I mentioned the front page of The Observer, and whether the Conservatives are rethinking that whole anti-health and safety culture. Ellie May, you've been looking at the coverage of the Grenfell Tower this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is extraordinary, this story from it's on the front of The Observer today, which is that ministers in panic U-turn over fire safety at schools. So there was going to be some cost-cutting measures around health and safety in schools. And, you know, in 2012, Cameron said that he was going to take on the monster of health and safety.
That's right.
And I think, you know, another thing that I've observed about Grenfell is that the residents tried to warn repeatedly about this. They tried to take legal action, but they couldn't do it because of cuts to legal aid. I think this is a story of wherever you look, there's a cut to public spending, and it has led to the death of dozens of innocent people. And it's, you know, I'm glad that there is a rowing back of this anti-health and safety discourse, because health and safety rules are there for a reason. I'm just sorry that it took such an appalling incident for it to happen.
Lots of coverage of Jeremy Corbyn at Glastonbury, as on the front page there as well. Some very derisive stuff, saying he should have been supporting the armed forces on Armed Forces Day, not going off to hang around with a bunch of mud-slaked hippies in a field in Somerset. What did you make of the coverage overall? I
mean, I think the coverage overall has been fairly positive, actually, and I think I think everybody in the media is kind of taken aback by how his fortunes have changed. You know, him and Theresa May seem to have swapped places in terms of how they're viewed by the public, and that is a remarkable turnaround. In terms of whether he should have been at Armed Forces Day, well, you know, at the end of the day, his policies to properly fund the NHS and public services will be a lot more beneficial to veterans than kind of attending one day in a year will be. So I don't really have much time for that. Yeah. And I think, you know, there's a crowd of 200,000 people at Glastonbury who are enthusiastic and interested, engaged in politics. You know,
go and reach them.
Why shouldn't you go and talk to them?
Henry, you are here partly because for the last 40 years you have been the voice of the English summer, particularly through Test Match Special, and we've been listening to you for a very, very long time. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, but before we do, I'd like to hear, there's a few of your highlights we're going to hear now.
Here's Willis, in, bowls to Bright. Bright bowled! The middle stamps out of the ground. England have won. They've won by 18 runs. Oh, look, I've just seen a crane at Lord's actually moving, doing some work. I've seen cranes all around this ground for years, and they've always been still, and that big white one there is moving. A moving crane, a yellow helicopter. What more has the day got to offer? Got the edge onto the pad, it ballooned into the air, and Bell dived forward like a porpoise after a fish, and came up with a winner. Oh, there's a pigeon. He's come in absolutely on cue. How splendid. Well, flying over the proceedings, beating his wings quickly. Rather cheered by this partnership, I think, because he's an English pigeon.
And here's Broad, just listen to the noise. He's up to the wicket, he Bowles managed to bowled him! It bowled him, he's taken the hat-trick! It's fantastic! It was an humdinger of a ball, it was a beauty!
Very good. Now, of course, we could not talk about Test Match Special without introducing the cake theme. Well, and we have produced for you, Henry, a cake.
Isn't that wonderful? I mean, that is just too good to be true.
77
cake,
not out.
Isn't that kind of you? Cakes Johners, Brian Johnston was the cake man, chocolate cakes. And then we moved over to fruit cakes. And, of course, the great moment came in 2001 when the Queen gave us the most imperial chocolate fruit cake she gave us. It was absolutely wonderful.
Well, I'm not quite sure what's inside that one, but I know for one thing, we're not going to try on air to find out.
Oh, that's the only reason I came on.
Later, it's a Madeira cake.
The icing is wonderful, isn't it?
You know what, they don't give you cakes at Sky, I'll tell you that.
They don't.
God bless
Down
Auntie.
market television for you. Now, it struck me, one of the big problems of your job was the long period of time you're on air for, and you have to fill that in some way. And it struck me that what you have is a particularly English surrealism, if I could put it. You know, the Continentals have Magritte, we have you.
Well, I mean, if you take a fast bowler who bowls an over, and all 6 balls are outside the off stump, the batsman doesn't play a stroke, you've got an awful lot of long time to fill in. And I love describing things. I love painting the entire picture. You look mostly, don't you, at the cricket, the thing that you're actually talking about. But if it's not for the grass under their feet, the trees around the ground, the people in the stands, then the sky, it's not the complete picture. And then you've got the mount and the frame. And I think you've got to...
You're a word painter.
Well, if you see, I think what you've got to do is let listeners know where you're sitting. And if they do that, and they can see it through your eyes, then they can pay you the ultimate compliment, which is, you made me feel I was there.
Well, as I say, the voice of the summer. Sadly, we don't have quite as much time as Test Match Special. Henry Blofeld, Ellie May, Fraser, thanks all very much for that.
The Observer says controversial government plans to relax fire safety rules in schools are being dropped after the Grenfell Tower fire. The Sunday Telegraph leads on a cyber attack in Parliament, saying there's a risk MPs could be blackmailed with stolen information. That warning is also on the front of the Sunday Times, which says the attack was state-sponsored. The Sunday Express criticises Jeremy Corbyn for speaking at Glastonbury instead of attending Armed Forces Day events. The Mail on Sunday leads on an interview with Prince Harry, who says he wanted out of the royal family when he was younger. And the Sunday Mirror says Susan Boyle is being terrorised by a gang of teenagers. Well, to talk about all of those stories, I'm joined by the fire safety expert Steve McKenzie, the political correspondent at The Spectator, Katie Ball, and the Financial Times political leader writer, Sebastian Payne. Thanks all for being here. Appreciate it. Feels like we should kick off with the appalling fire, the stories that just keep coming about the safety regulations and this revelation that every single sample tested so far has failed the tests. Steve, it's just appalling.
It's absolutely stunning. It's a tragic loss of life, a mass evacuation. It's been unprecedented. We haven't seen that before in the UK under civil contingencies. And then we're finding that our fundamental building standard and fire safety legislation has been brought into disrepute. It is not just local authority housing, as we're finding. The papers are now reporting on expert witness cases in the NHS, schools, other accommodations as well.
So what's gone wrong then? What's gone so terribly wrong?
The lessons are there to be learned from previous public inquiries and fire incidents such as Camberwell, the Garrett Court fire. The politicians know about this. It just hasn't filtered through into our building standards and fire safety legislation despite the fire sector's best efforts. It's a big business, safety is a big business, lots of money riding on this, and this will hurt our economy now because it will be bringing into question not only buildings in the UK but internationally. Where is the government? And I think there should be calls now for a European or potentially a United Nations inquiry into this, because our building standards and regulations are used as a template for other countries out in the Middle East and ex-Commonwealth countries. So this isn't just the UK, this is an international disaster now.
Huge political implications as well. I mean, how do you think Theresa May's handled it, Sebastian?
It could have done a lot better, I think, that she was very slow in her initial response, and part of this is trying to deal with the snap general election result, a deal with the DUP, Brexit talks kicking off, and then this terrible tragedy at the same time. And the government's response was very slow, as was that of Kensington and Chelsea Council, and very much as we've seen in the papers today, it was left to the local community to rally round and provide basic levels of support that should have happened there. And all these tests that we've read about in the papers are absolutely shocking, that this is, you know, not just one incident, it's across the whole country, it's not just London. There's tower blocks in the north of England now that have had this cladding on that looks to be dangerous. But I suppose the question people are asking is, how was this banned in Germany and the US and it wasn't raised as a problem here? And I think there's going to be some very hard questions, as you were saying, Steve, yes, about the UK's building culture and where the regulations went wrong.
Yeah, and also we've got more confusion because last week we heard from Philip Hammond that this was, you know, banned here, or it should have been, and then we see this cladding as being used all over. So you feel that the government don't quite have a grip on this, even now with the information they're putting out. They've said it wasn't good enough, but it still doesn't look good enough in how they're handling this. Definitely.
I mean, at FireX this week, the 6 panel experts on Tuesday, when they were asked, put your hand up if you agree with Philip Hammond's viewpoint, we didn't. And it looks as if the government is actually using the press to catch up and take milestones and pointers from independent experts such as myself. Where is the independent fire advisor to the Home Office? Where is the independent advisor to the Department of Community and Local Government? We're now seeing not only building issues and fire issues and the Camden evacuation, we're now seeing gas safety issues. Our system's falling apart. The warning signs were there, and we're now seeing more worrying, and I'm absolutely furious at some of the press that we've seen this week, as someone that's lost 4 family members in a gas explosion, that some politicians are using it for political gain and leverage. Stop that now. Let's respect the victims, let's respect the families and those tenants that are now disposed. Strong words there.
Another story in a lot of the papers today is the kind of manoeuvrings in the Conservative Party. No leadership contest, of course, we're told, but tell that to the backbench MPs. And according to the Sunday Times, Spreadsheet Phil is in the running.
It's really quite amazing. You can look at any paper and take any story you want from it. So if you want the Sunday Times, it's going to be Philip Hammond buttressed by David Davis, and that's going to be an interim leadership just to get us through the next few years. If you read The Sun on Sunday, you've got John Redwood saying that Theresa May isn't going anywhere and she's going to bring William Hague back to try and support her. If you read The Mail on Sunday, it's going to be David Davis on his own. So really take your pick of what's going on. But the clear thing is, the manoeuvrings, the soundings, the quiet meetings, they are happening, despite what you heard from people like Ken Clark earlier, that there is no leadership contest. There is a leadership contest.
Is that what you're picking up as well?
Yeah, though I do think the fact that the papers are just so conflicted in which MP is saying the best person is, or what briefing they've had, just shows you that in a way, Theresa May might have a bit more time because no one's actually come to an agreement of what the best strategy is. And I do think, even though we're hearing about Philip Hammond as a caretaker PM, a lot of people in the Brexit camp would be very worried about Philip Hammond taking on that role, because even since the result, he feels emboldened to really push for kind of things like staying in the customs union, and people like Liam Fox are not going to like that, partly because he would be out of a job probably.
From some perspective of someone outside of the Westminster bubble, what do you make of all this kind of leadership manoeuvre?
Anyone in fire safety at my level never truly gets away from the Westminster environment.
Fair.
Having just come off some very sensitive contracts in Whitehall, including the country's nuclear deterrent, we can't get away from the politics. The politics enshrined, we need to take a look at it. We need to look at that we have the best people representing us as a nation. And I think both at central government and local authorities, following these civil contingencies, catastrophes in their response and ineptness and failure to take the advice off of sector and the wider independents, that this should become core party manifestos and issues for whoever's looking at leadership.
I'm keen to end on Jeremy Corbyn at Glastonbury. As someone who is partial to the music festival, it feels like going to Glastonbury this year would be a bit like work, with the amount of politicians who are there. John McDonnell, Ed Balls, Yvette Cooper, Jeremy Corbyn. How much do you think we should read into the fact that he had those thousands of people chanting his name?
Well, I think all those well-known hard-right Brexity attendees at Glastonbury will be very hard for him to persuade. You know, it's preaching to his own crowd here, but it does just show what a transformed figure was. You know, even a couple of months ago, Jeremy Corbyn was being under fire from his MPs, from his own shadow cabinet, from the media, and now he stands up in a crowd of tens, hundreds of thousands of people and gets his message out there and looks like the man of the moment. You know, really, whereas Theresa May, as we've just been saying, is being under fire all the time. Jeremy Corbyn is looking very happy and pleased with himself, and, you know, he had a good election campaign, so maybe so he should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's not traditional Tory stomping ground. It was the Progress, which is the Blairite think tank, conference yesterday, but I do think there are probably more Labour politicians at Glastonbury, so maybe they can just move it there next year.
Thank you very much for all your thoughts on the stories in the morning papers. It's appreciated.
Now, where on earth to begin after another bonkers week? She wore a hat which some saw as modelled on the European Union flag while announcing her legislative programme that was mostly about Brexit and was notable, as he pointed out, for what was not in it. So those vote-losing Tory proposals to make older people poorer, to cancel free school meals for young children and to end the ban on grammar schools have vanished. Later, she gave us the shocking news about quite how many people may be living in council house fire traps. Also, she almost gave a commitment that 3 million EU citizens living here can stay forever, so maybe Brexit talks won't be sour from the off, though, to quote the poet Donald Tusk, "You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one." Or am I, Allegra Screeny?
God, with tune as well. Always the only one. Now, look, one tumultuous year on from the referendum, you'd think public opinion might have tickled up or down, but amazingly, we seem to think exactly the same. Look at this from this morning. Matt Singh's highlighted it, very good pollster. Remain at 48 and leave at 52. Incredible. Now, what's also the same was last year, the Tories were in a leadership contest, and now they look to be gearing up for a second. Speculation about it is all over. The Sunday papers. Here we have Tory plot to skip a toxic generation and install younger face as leader. So that's bye-bye Boris, bye-bye Philip Hammond. Except the Sunday Times appears to disagree. They have a story suggesting that ministers want to stick Spreadsheet Phil, also known as the Chancellor, in place. Now, one man whose leadership is very safe is Jeremy Corbyn. You can see here he is at Glastonbury. But is Corbyn winning over everyone, or is it just the good welly brigade of Glasgow? We have looked back at one very, very good measure. This is who would make the best Prime Minister. And you can see, obviously, Tony Blair riding high in 2005. 2007, Gordon Brown having a very good time. But then the blue line, David Cameron, he inches up, and then he goes on in an election to take the most seats. And now, look, come all the way up to the present day and the last week, and these are incredible reversals of fortune. Here you have Jeremy Corbyn taking over now on this metric of who would make the best Prime Minister. So, is this peak Corbyn? Is it just a moment or a more profound shift in public opinion? Now, one man we thought we'd ask is Craig Oliver. He helped Cameron secure that majority against the odds. Craig, you've just joined Twitter. If you're watching, who of the Tories you've worked with can turn this around and take on the Corbynista? Robert.
So I'm delighted to be joined by my political charms, Angela Regal of Labour, Jacob Rees-Mogg from the Tories. I thought I'd just start, since we've, as you've seen, provided this wonderful patriotic breakfast. We ditched, you know, the croissants with their European Union connotations, and, you know, we've got Union flag chocolates, an amazing pile of, which I'm not tucking into, I'm very deeply worried to say, a great pile of bacon sandwiches. Jacob, when you heard Andrea Leadsom say that people like me have to be more patriotic in our coverage, what did you think?
Well, I thought you should have started your programme with a rendition of Land and Hope and Glory, then we should have stood up for the national anthem, and you've wonderfully given us a patriotic breakfast. I think you're getting into the spirit of things. This is admirable. The BBC could learn from you.
This does feel slightly like the spirit of the People's Republic of China, doesn't it, Angela, rather than the great British tradition?
Yes, I think we can all want there to be a good deal because our prosperity as a country relies on it, but that doesn't mean that our broadcasters have to be uncritical of what's going on when it's going on. You've got a job to do, and that doesn't mean you're unpatriotic.
I mean, you spend all your time trying to hold power to account, Jacob. That's what we should do, isn't it? I mean, patriotism doesn't enter into it.
I agree with that. I think there is an issue, actually, for the BBC. I happen to think the BBC was incredibly good during the referendum campaign and tried very hard, in spite of the fact that most people there were for Remain, to be impartial. And I think they succeeded in that. But I do think the BBC has a strong tone of Remonerism. And that is an issue.
Do you detect that, Angela?
No, I don't. And I actually object to this phrase, Remonerism or Remoners. Just because there's been a referendum and there's a result which everybody accepts, it doesn't mean to say that you can't be critical or worried about it, or worried about what's been lost and fearful about the future. And I think that the Brexit vote has thrown a lot of things up in the air, and our future prosperity as a country, certainly the people I represent in Wallasey, their future prosperity, is now less certain than it was before. There's a lot that could go wrong, and expressing worries or views about that, expressing regret about a democratic decision, is part of a good democracy.
Now, we'll come back to all of this a bit later, but I do want to ask you about this hacking of MPs' emails. How worried are you about that? Suggestions that, and we don't quite know who, but, you know, malevolent overseas forces may have got really quite confidential information about you and your constituents.
It is extremely worrying, and we've all been locked out of our accounts remotely. And we know that various state actors over the last period have mounted cyber attacks on parliamentary systems. I just hope that they've been able to protect that confidentiality.
Have you had any information yet, Jacob, from the authorities about what may have been compromised?
No, I've had no specific information, but I agree with Angela. It is concerning. It would have been more concerning if it had been the Ministry of Defence that had been hacked. The information could be embarrassing and awkward that's released, but it won't affect national security. But I think cybersecurity is going to be an increasing challenge for the government, particularly as the people who seem to be involved are state operators, and that this is an attack on the nation by another nation, and that's really tricky in terms of foreign affairs.